Good afternoon, and welcome to another edition of the NAIC Insight Series. I'm your host, Bob Greene, and I am delighted to be joined today by none other than Undersecretary of Commerce for Minority Business Development, Donald R. Cravins Jr. Welcome, Don.
Thank you, Brother Greene. It's great to see you, sir. It's a pleasure to be on Insights, and I know you have had some heavy hitters before. I hope not to disappoint the members of NAIC, a poor country boy from Louisiana, but I'm honored to be here, man, and looking forward to spend some time with you.
No, we're honored to have you. And look, you are the first cabinet official to ever appear in the 30 or so interviews that we've done. You're the first cabinet official, and I couldn't think of a better place to start. So looking forward to having you, looking forward to hearing from you and learning more. Let me start by having you tell the folks this big, significant title, what is the role of the job? What are the things that you're focused on? And maybe give us a little bit of the historical significance of it.
Well, Bob, first of all, let me thank you again. And I want to thank NAIC and your members. When I was nominated for this position by the President of the United States, you and NAIC were one of the first groups to give me a letter of support and to recommend me to the United States Senate for confirmation. I received unanimous consideration and voting by the United States Senate, and I believe that is in large part to the input that you all gave for that process. This organization, your organization, is one of the most well-respected organizations in this space on both sides of the political aisle. And when you all speak, trust me, you know this, people listen. And to be able to receive that endorsement, to receive that support. And I didn't have a pre-existing relationship of sorts. To the fact that you all put your confidence and faith in me, I want you to know before I even get started that I am working hard every day to meet that, to make that expectation, because I know that you all don't do that willy-nilly or without some thought. And so I just wanted to say, if I haven't said it publicly before, thank you. Thank all the great men and women who are members of, work for, partner with NAIC, and thank you for what you've done for this country to get us to this point. Now, I know we're going to have some conversation today about where do we go from here, but we don't sometimes stop and just thank each other and love each other and give each other grace. And so I wanted to just, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for the support. MBDA, the Minority Business Development Agency, was a thought that was started over 53 years ago. And it was created by men and women, very much like the folks who are still part of NAIC and our civil rights and our economic rights community. This was at the tail end of the civil rights community when people like Dr. King and Whitney M. Young and others were saying, yes, it's important to have social and civil rights, but we must also have economic rights. And that it's not enough just to vote. We want to own a business. And not just any business. We want to own a successful business and a business that maybe that Black and brown folks haven't owned in the past. And so as a result of that pressure that was coming out of the end of the tail end of the civil rights movement, President Nixon, Bob Brown, others created an executive order which created the Office of Minority Business Enterprise, which later became, as you all know, the MBDA. The issue, though, was the office was temporary, and it was a temporary agency with a temporary budget, temporary leadership. I said this to a group of people today that, we have been so fortunate to have men and women who believe in MBDA even when it was temporary. But think about it: who really wants to invest their talent, their career in something that may not be here tomorrow? And so that was the issue with MBDA. You had great years of MBDA, and then you had lean years of MBDA. But however, in 2020, 2021. Bipartisan members of Congress decided that it was time for MBDA to become codified and made it a permanent agency. And President Biden signed it into law in November of 2021. And so for the first time, MBDA is a permanent, codified, one of the newest federal agencies in the federal government. And the reason why that's important, Brother Bob, is three reasons. It gave us really three important reasons. One, it created for the first time an undersecretary of minority business development. That's significant because they could have created a directorship. They could have created an assistant secretary position. And look, those are all very, very high positions. But to make the leader of this agency an undersecretary, it put us on the same tier with the Census, the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, NIST, the NOAA. I mean, and so when I am at these tables and the people who will be my successors are at these tables, we're not just at the kiddie table or at a folding chair at the table. We're setting the menu. And so that was the first important part of the act. The second part of the act that's significant is it expands what we're able to do. For the first time, we have a budget and we're able to grow a staff. Since I've been in office over the past 8 months, we've doubled our staff. When I inherited the agency, we had 32 dedicated employees who were holding on to a temporary agency. We're now near at 60 today as we're talking. And we've been able to find talented people who want to work at a permanent agency. And then the last thing that Congress has said to MBDA is, and you need to be the voice of minority business enterprises at the government level as well in the private sector as well. And so we've expanded our voice. And that is where I'm excited to look at the potential with NAIC that I think if any of the members would read, and I ask you I'll give you all a little homework, read the Minority Business Development Act, the act that actually created the department. It's only about 80 pages, and most of those are a lot of legalese. But when you read the substance, Senator Cardin and Senator Tim Scott and Senator Wicker and Congressman Greene, when they were writing that act, they were very creative in the powers and the authorities of the MBDA, some of which I've not even been able to really do anything with because I don't have the staff or haven't had the time. But I would love to work with you all, especially on that last part where the Congress has said, MBDA, you must be the voice for minority businesses on the state level, the local level, the federal level, private equity level. That's where I think we have to step up. But anyway, I know that's a long answer to the question, but this is a great time. This is what we were fighting for. There would be an agency solely dedicated to our business enterprises. Now we have it. Let's put it to work.
Well, Don, having grown up in the Black church, there's a saying that I know you're familiar with, and it goes, "I'm so glad." Right.
Yes.
I am one of the many people that is so glad that this agency was codified. And I'm even more delighted and enthusiastic about your leadership. And that's why, frankly, Don, it wasn't a hard choice as to whether or not we were going to write a letter to support. I'll give you a little bit of history. And I know you've heard me say this before, but I'll repeat it here. It was as a result of the temporary agency that preceded yours that NAIC got some of its initial funding to get started 53 years ago.
Yes.
Right? So extraordinary at the time. NAIC was chartered as the American Association of Mesbics, right?
Yeah.
And, we've known of famed attorney Reggie Lewis and his work around Mesbics, but it was MBDA that helped get that going for us.
Yes.
And so if you think about the power of that and almost the serendipity of that, here you and I are, 50 plus years later.
Yes.
Many of the issues are still prevalent, right? And we're going to talk about those. Many of the challenges are there, but we do have a foothold in place, and it takes a foothold before you can lift yourself up. So
that's right.
Let's talk a little bit about the key priorities of your agency. What are some of the things you're focused on now and into the future, Don?
Well, Bob, the first couple of things I needed to do was I needed to establish a baseline at the agency. And so we first had to, I'll break, the first thing we had to do is we had to make sure that people were treating us and we were treating ourselves like a permanent agency. When you have a culture of temporariness, if that's the word, or being a temporary nature, it becomes the way we think. It becomes the way people treat. And so the first thing we had to do at MBDA was we had to actually convince the staff.
Mm-hmm.
I want to make her job or his job easier by not having them to have to focus on office space and the things that you would to build a business or build an agency. And so first thing was just getting us settled into our space, making sure that we had equipment, making sure that we had the right equipment for an agency, and building a personnel. And so, as I said, we immediately hit the ground running and hired some good folks, people who want to be with us. And so that was number one. The second priority, I think, for me was to visit the business centers that we run. So MBDA right now, as it stands, is still primarily a technical assistance agency. We have 88 centers in grant equities all across America, 36 states, including DC and Puerto Rico, where businesses of all sizes, all makes and models that are owned by founders of color or people of color can go in for technical assistance and business support services. And so that's our sweet spot. But if it's going to be our sweet spot, it has to be really, really efficient and really, really good. And it's what Secretary Raimondo and I talk about all the time. Our business centers must be excellent. And the quality of work that you receive or services that you receive from a business center in Cleveland should be just as good as it is here in where I am today in Louisiana. The quality, the curriculum. And so that has been my second priority. So first, staff and internal. Second has been really the face of the organization, the business centers. And then I'd say my third priority has been establishing, and this is what we're working on now, establishing MBDA as a convener, as a place where businesses can come to be heard, and that now Cravins and the MBDA team can take those voices and amplify them. I'll give you an example, Bob. This is something that is keeping me up at night. We've invested trillions of dollars into the American economy in the form of infrastructure. And I know your members are finding ways and are participating in that. But what keeps me up at night is, although I want to see as many small and micro minority firms do some of that work, and we're going to work very hard to scale them up and build them up to do some of that procurement work, that federal procurement, I don't think that we can small and micro ourselves out of some of the gaps that exist in this country in the minority business community. We need some of those firms that have been around for 20, 30 years. I call them mid-sized minority firms to participate as well. But as you and your members well know, many of those firms have already graduated from the 8A program. Many of those firms, because of the founder's net worth, have been excluded now from some of the set-aside programs. And so what I see is that many minority-owned firms that have gotten out of those programs are now too big to be small, but way too small to be competing against the biggest titans in America. And so we are going to be using our convening power very, very soon, our authority very, very soon, to bring those firms in. I'm going to be working with NMSDC, another agency, another organization that was founded kind of out of MBDA as well. And we're going to be working with some of those mid-sized firms and those mid-sized businesses, because we got to get to the bottom. Our communities will not see the full potential of the infrastructure that President Biden and members of Congress are implementing into our community if our best, most excellent minority-owned engineering firms and law firms and accounting firms and investors can't participate. And so those are the types of things that, when you ask me priority, internal, business center, but also we got to be a convener, and MBDA needs to take its rightful place as the place where people can come for information and for policy. And then you all members can decide what they're going to do with it after that. But we have to be that agency for minority business enterprises.
Don, I recently had an opportunity to meet your dad. You and I were at a White House event together, and I think you brought your pops with you, and it was a pleasure to meet him. And I couldn't help but how proud he was. I couldn't help but notice how proud he was. And in conversation, I told him you were amazing, and he said, no, he's prepared. And I love that answer. I love that answer. Talk to us a little bit about your background, because leadership is about when preparation meets opportunity. And I agree with you that you are prepared. Talk to us a little bit about your background and what you bring to this job.
Well, thanks for that question. You know, my dad and I are best of friends. I mean, you know, he was best man in my wedding, and he and I kid each other a lot. We play rough. We play hard, jokingly, all with love, but we tease one another a lot. When you asked him that question, I assumed he was going to give you the answer he always gives people. Well, I made him. I trained him myself. He's a chip off the old block. Of course, he's, you know. And he didn't. You're right. It's so interesting you remember his response, because that was the first time in my 50 years living with him where his response was, yeah, he's prepared. And and I was proud of him giving that response in a lot of ways too, because he's right, and a lot of that preparation absolutely comes from him and my mother. My parents still own and operate a small business in Southwest Louisiana, and it's an insurance agency, and owned other businesses, a Creole restaurant and a little grocery store at one point. We had a black newspaper that we owned and operated for a little bit. My parents are those serial entrepreneurs that many of you know in those small towns and even in the urban areas, in the neighborhoods, who I just wonder, had they been given a real opportunity, what the potential would have been. We did well, though. We did okay. But Jesus, I remember those days and nights when we were at the dinner table, wondering how we were going to make payroll that week, how we were going to pay Miss Verna, who was one of the agents who helped us sell automobile insurance, and how are we, and wondering, should we ask for the loan, knowing we were going to have to give up the home that both of my grandfathers, that were both carpenters, built, that we may have to put that on the line as collateral. I remember that, and it made a significant impact in my life. My mom was an educator and an entrepreneur. My dad was in the insurance business, and they're both still very healthy and very much a part of that. I left home and found a wonderful partner in a wonderful wife at Southern University Law School. Mm-hmm. And she and I, our partnership has helped keep me prepared, I guess. My parents prepared me in the parenting way, but the wife has definitely helped bring me along. And so I got an opportunity to serve in the Louisiana legislature. I served with my father. I was a state representative. My father was a state senator. And we were the first father and son to serve at the same time, the only to ever be able to do that in Louisiana. And it doesn't happen often anywhere. But even that was a preparation. We served during Hurricanes Rita and Katrina, which really decimated, still are having an impact in my home state of Louisiana to this day. But I watched businesses be resilient, and I watched minority businesses be hurt and struggle. I left Louisiana and I went to work for Senator Mary Landrieu, where I was her staff director of the Senate Small Business Committee, one of 2 Black staff directors at the time, and maybe one of less than 10 to ever be a staff director, African-American to ever to serve as a staff director. But again, it was small business, and I got a chance for the first time to see the policy behind businesses, small businesses, but businesses of color as well. And then I'd say the other thing that has prepared me is working at the National Urban League, the job that I had just prior to this. I've spent 2 stints at the National Urban League, one at the Washington Bureau, where I ran policy for, still one of America's most preeminent civil rights organizations. And then most recently was executive vice president. Learning from Mark Morial, learning from the history of the Urban League, I have become a Whitney Young disciple, because I think if you read his books today, Bob, I mean, other than just some of the words being, outdated, like Negro, and what he's saying, we still are dealing with, and with our minority business enterprises and some of those things. All of those things, God has a plan. Yep. Jeremiah 29:11, right? And so had a plan, and here at 50, I feel it, and I'm there, and I'm honored to be. I'm blessed to be the undersecretary at this point. But yes, thank God, I've been prepared, and I do think I'm the right person at the right time for this job. But I can't do it alone. And thankfully, I've just got wonderful family, wonderful wife now, 3 wonderful children, and still have those parents who are still working that small business, who are still being very supportive.
Well, they made you very humble as well. In addition to all the good training and the great example of leadership, your humility is quite impressive. Don, I think we're going to look back on this era as being a golden age of leadership in our space. I don't think that there has ever been a time when more organizations have invested in having strong leaders. When I think about NMSDC and Ying McGuire's work and all that she's trying to do, when I think about the aforementioned Mark Morial and the Urban League, and he really has become our dean of this era because he's been in the role a long time, and he's been able to speak in a way that resonates in both the boardroom and on Main Street. Ron Busby, U.S. Black Chamber, Nicole Elam, National Bankers Association. What do you do? How do you, with all of these strong leaders, with all of these folks who want to wave their flag, how do you get into the role and be what you're chartered to be, which is the voice, and yet use that Southern gentleman style of yours to bring everybody's talents into the orchestra?
Well, the good news is most of the folks who are in these roles are, as you said, gentlemen and ladies and people who are kind and understand that this work comes with a certain bedside manner. I work very well with the communities, not just in the African American community, but all of the ethnic groups. And what I have found is we really are living in a unique period where we are working we want to work together. I won't say we're always working together. I think that's some of that convening. And I think that's part of your question is, how do we convene? How do we better work together? The good news is I think we've got some wonderful brothers and sisters in all of our minority and racial ethnic communities who really are genuinely good and understand that this is a very special time in our nation's history, that if we can work together, we can be intentional, we can focus on equity for the first time, really focus on equity, that we can do some great things. I like being part of the group. I like being a convener. I like being a problem solver. I like being someone who brings good news generally. And if it's tough news that needs to be discussed, trying to bring a solution. So that's the way I think. You know what, Bob, where I probably got my best preparation is, I was in the legislature and I was a member of the legislature and a principal. And I probably was not my best person then, meaning I became good when I became a staffer. I mean, I just thought about that. When I became a staff director for a U.S. senator, when I got to Congress and I saw the elevation, the level of policy that was being done at the federal level as compared to what I was doing, I loved being a state senator. I loved it. But the difference, and not doing it as a principal, voting on stuff or making decisions, having to inform decisions, having to learn something and then inform someone. Really, I was 37 or so when I got to DC, just still young enough, I guess, to not be an old dog. And I was able to learn some new tricks, but it has really made the difference. I think that's how I'm able to get along with other principals. I still look at Ron Busby, my dear friend. Ron is the president of the U.S. Black Chamber. I'm the staffer. I'm always going to be Mark's number 2 or 3 or 4. Nicole is the president. I'm always be her staffer. And so I approach a lot of this with, I'm the staffer. My job is to provide you leaders with the information. You, Bob Greene, you're a principal. I'm going to provide you and NAIC with information, with the statistics, with a roadmap, with a plan, with my view from the government. But at the end of the day, we need our leaders like you to make those decisions. And I guess since I've kind of been more in that staff role, I'm okay with it. I really like it. It allows me to be intentional. It allows me to play a support role. And then the egos never become an issue because I'm here to support. And I think that's, again, God had a plan. I could have absolutely continued to be the principal, but it's good to be the chief sometime and the worker, right? It's good sometimes to be the chef and the sous chef. And God knows my wife has taught me that. I know who the boss is in my house, and it's good. It's good sometimes to know your place. And so I think that has prepared me to be a good supporter and not always have to be the leader. And that is how I think I'm able to work with so many dynamic leaders from different backgrounds and different styles.
Well, that is a fabulous answer, and I appreciate the thought and the delicacy the delicateness that went into that. So I want to walk through. You, like I, being similar generation, we learned a lot of what we were exposed to about minority business from our beloved Earl Graves, right? And the years that he poured into creating Black Enterprise magazine, that his son Butch continues that tradition today. But one of the things that is interesting about minority business is it more than ever is all around us, right? It's everywhere. And so let's talk about some of the topics. Let's talk about entrepreneurship. Let's talk about entrepreneurship in communities of color. What are your thoughts? Where are we headed? What do the statistics and trends say? And what role does MBDA play in promoting entrepreneurship?
Well, we know that Black and brown women are the fastest growing numbers of entrepreneurs. We know that there's an entrepreneurial spirit out there. I think some of it is based upon the fact that African Americans have always, and people of color have always had to be entrepreneurial. in our communities. I think some of it's just who we are. I also think it's this generation. I mean, our children and our grandchildren, the millennials and the Gen Zers and the folks who will be coming after that, they are just a different group of young people. They want to own and not just work for. And so I think you're seeing that as well. So from an entrepreneurial place, Bob, when we do these seminars, when you all have hosted your events, I mean, folks are there. Like there's an excitement in the air. There's a feeling of hope. There's just something different right now. It's why I would leave my good job at the National Urban League. I think there is something different right now. So that's the good news. To answer that question, I think entrepreneurship as on its own. I've been traveling the country. I was just recently in Detroit with the Michigan Minority Supplier Development Council. Thousands of people there. Was in Georgia, the Georgia Minority Supplier. Hundreds of people there. There is just this energy, this spirit behind entrepreneurship. I see it in the Latino community. I see it in the Asian American community. I was at the RES conference recently. I see it in the Indigenous and Native American. So from a hope and a goodwill place, people of color and others, we are excited about opportunities. Technology is giving us that. So very hopeful.
Yeah, no, I am as well. And like I said, you see it everywhere. I would encourage you to think about talking with your colleagues at the Department of Education. And this is going to be a new test of your powers to see if there isn't something we can do to stimulate curriculum enhancement so that our children get more education around entrepreneurship early. You know, we still have a curriculum that's very heavily based upon, you know, the hard sciences and math, and that's wonderful.
Work.
But these folks are going to definitely need some jobs, and they're going to need some training for it. So would love to see some focus there. What about our relationship with corporate America? And I'm particularly sensitive about supplier diversity and not necessarily NMSDC supplier diversity, but just the big general predating topic, supplier diversity. Where do you think we are relative to our relationship with corporate America as suppliers?
Well, I want to go back just quickly to entrepreneurship at the educational level. I'm glad you raised that. We're happy to reach out to the Department of Ed. What I will tell you is we've been doing a lot of education at the college level and the junior college level on entrepreneurship. We gave 6 grants away this year to HBCUs and Hispanic serving institutions and indigenous serving institutions. And we're going to continue doing that. Part of the Minority Business Development Act, Bob, that I know your members will be happy to hear is we created a new grant program called the Parent J. Mitchell Entrepreneurship Program after the wonderful and great Congressman Mitchell, who you know was the entrepreneurship dude. I mean, and still we're trying to still walk in his shoes. That program will be one we will be able to start laying out in hopefully fiscal year 2024, where we can start giving some entrepreneurial grants to some of these young people so we can build that next level. Now, that does not answer the question you brought up, which was, or the issue you brought up, raised, which is, what about high school and junior high? And we absolutely need to be doing more about that. The private firms. We know after George Floyd, there were commitments in the billions that were made by corporations. And some of it was philanthropy. Some of it was geared towards supplier diversity. I think our corporate citizens are saying the right things. And I'm here at a conference today where I was there to talk about supplier diversity. I do think NMSDC and others do a great job about raising the issue, and there's some trickle down not only for their members, that there are others as well. The rubber in the road and where they meet is still an issue, and I still hear, I think, too many corporate citizens, private equity, private citizens, private sector folks who still say we can't find, or it's hard to do, or it's hard to. And what our message to them is one, that is why Minority Business Development Agency is so important. We've got these business centers. You all have contacts and networks as well. We've got our chambers of commerce as well. And so we have to make it, I was going to say we need to make it easier. I think already it's not that difficult to find folks, but we're going to keep training businesses, but we do need private citizens, the private sector, to step up. I'm not satisfied with where we are with supplier diversity. We know supplier diversity is good for profit. We know it's the right thing to do, but it's really a great business thing to do. We know that there's no greater example of that than COVID, when people who had more diverse supply lines were uninterrupted or had less disruption, as opposed to those people who had supply lines all only overseas or only on one company. And so we know that supply diversity is good for America, both economically and morally, but there's still some work to do. I gave a speech today, and what I said to this group of very sophisticated, successful companies in America, my job is to get rid of the reason or the excuse of we can't find minority firms who do certain things.
Yeah.
I think we can find minority firms who do a whole hell of a lot of things, but if we can't, then we got to build them, we got to foster them, we got to do them. One of the programs we launched, Bob, that I think can help us to do some of that is, in addition to the 88 centers I talked about earlier, the Department of Treasury gave to the Minority Business Development Agency just last year $100 million to create a new program, and the name of that program is called the Capital Readiness Program. And the reason we called it that is because the intention is to really make minority firms more capital ready by training them up, scaling them up. And the way this program will work is the money will be granted to people like business incubators, business accelerators, to get businesses scaled up, ready to go. Now, our intent for doing it was to get people ready to do infrastructure projects. But to answer your question, it should also scale up more minority businesses to do some supplier diversity stuff as well. And so are we where we need to be? No. I think the companies are saying the right things. I think the companies have good intent. Many of them do. I think that they've created some programs, but I think it's been slow. I think still it's been disjointed with the actual reality of, well, we can't find. Well, did you look? Well, there has to be, and so that is another role. I talked about this in my first answer. MBDA has to be the convener. And so what I am saying to these folks when I'm speaking to them is, then look no further. MBDA can help you. We'll connect you to Bob Greene. You're looking for somebody who can do some of this work. I'll get you to Ron Busby or Charles DeBow at the National Black Chamber. You're looking for a Latino business in a certain part of the country that can do a certain thing that's owned by a woman. We can help you. And if we can't, we'll find someone who can. We have that network. We have to be unapologetic about the offer to do that work. We have to be unapologetic about our networks and what really exists out there. And so that's where we are at MBDA.
So if you and I were to enroll in the University of John Rogers, our mutual dear friend, John would break it down as capabilities, 3 C's, capabilities, capital, and contracts, right?
Yeah.
And you can't spend much time with John or Melody these days without hearing about that. Your agency plays a central role in capabilities. You've been working on technical assistance since your inception, right?
Yeah.
And we both learned the lessons of COVID were one where we didn't have some of the capabilities, right? Talk a little bit about that capacity building and that capability building so that we don't look up and continue to see just sole proprietorships driving the numbers, but they're really complex, sophisticated, robust, institutionalized minority companies.
Well, our network of 88 business centers has got to be able to really do that capability. I call it my 3 C's with counseling, contracts, and capital, but the counseling, the capability, how you get people scaled up, ready to go at all sizes. I'm very, very intentional when I say minority business in this country cannot equate small business. So you don't hear me say that often. We absolutely serve. We must have curriculum. We must have capabilities and support for our small and micro businesses, because many of our businesses of color are that. And our business centers have to be able to meet those firms where they are and help them be what they want to be. Do they want to move into mid-size at some point, or do they want to stay small and just be a community store or a community center? We've got to meet those people. But our centers have also got to be sophisticated enough to take mid-size businesses or even large minority-owned businesses and provide value to them as well. And Bob, we got to be able to meet the sister who's got a business in Atlanta, and I got to be able to meet the Latina sister who's got a business in LA, and I've got to be able to look at what they do And our centers have to be sophisticated enough to provide resources and capability to both of them. That is the MBDA that I'm trying to build. Now, sometimes when you say technical support, people, especially some of us who've been around for a little while or who've made it, all right, some of our bougie businesses, we laugh at, I don't need that. That's not the right way to look at what technical support or business support services are going to be. I've never met it. My parents have been in business for over 40 years. Each and every day, my dad will tell me he learned something new about business that day. MBDA has to be that type of agency, that type of resource that even the most sophisticated business person, the Bob Greene of the world, could pick up the phone and call one of my business center directors and say, you know what, she told me something, or introduced me to someone I didn't know, or introduced me to something I didn't know, or provided me a paper on something I didn't know much about. That is the agency I think MBDA has to be first. And that's why I've spent so much time on the first two priorities you asked me about. Building a team. I brought in some men and some women, especially some women, because I wanted the job done right the first time, who are going to help really infuse business excellence in our business centers. Really, and look, our centers are doing a great job, but we want to make sure they all have the tools and the resources they need so that people are getting what they need. So we brought in a staff to do that. And then the second thing we're doing is we're really going to spend some time with our business centers. And look, we have traditional business centers in states, but we've got 4 exporting centers, Bob Greene. We want to see more minority businesses exporting to Africa or Asia or Central and South America. And minority businesses want to do that. We've got 4 centers in America that if you pick up the phone or call them or email them or reach out through us, we can help you export your stuff. I was just in Kenya. We've got 4 advanced manufacturing centers across America. We have a federal procurement center in Washington, D.C. So we not only just have the traditional business center, we've tried to create these business centers of excellence as well that we can put you in the direction and point you. I'm going to be working to make sure those centers are performing optimally, because at the end of the day, I think that's the best thing that MBDA can do. Now, the capital pieces that we'll talk about, the other gaps, we want to be a voice in that. But until I receive the authority from Congress or the money from Congress to have a loan guarantee program or a grant program that grants directly to businesses, right now, the best help I think MBDA can be, the best, doesn't mean we can't do other things, is to be the best technical assistance or business support service or capability, to use Brother John. That is the best thing we can do. And if Don Cravins can get us on that road or continue us on that road, then that's what I mean. Whoever comes after me, if she doesn't have to focus quite as much on that, so she can now go focus on contracting more, or can focus more on markets, or can focus on doing something bigger than we've ever thought, I want to at least be able to lay that foundation and that roadmap for the next undersecretary. That's where I see my vision. That's where I think I can be the most helpful. And so we've got wonderful men and women who are running these centers, but we want to make sure that when you walk in, there's a certain level of curriculum that you don't get anywhere else.
Don, about, I don't know, about 60 years ago, right down the hill from your current office, a young Southern preacher talked about a dream he had. And part of that dream was claiming the check that America had written. And he started talking about economic development. And unfortunately, his life was cut short. And obviously, I'm talking about Dr. Martin Luther King. But something existed then of a significant wealth gap. And that same wealth gap exists today. Yes. What role does MBDA under your leadership play and accept under helping close the wealth gap?
Well, great question. I talked about this just the other day in Detroit. You know, the wealth gap is growing, unfortunately, and the pandemic didn't help with that. I think a couple of things about the wealth gap. One, we need to understand the wealth gap. I think people of color need to truly, truly understand the wealth gap and how we got to the wealth gap. And one of the big, in addition to slavery and generations of being left out and left behind, even in the Latino and other Asian and the Asian American community, which created gaps there as well. What has continued the gap and made the gap a persistent gap is we also continue to lose out on the new innovations and revolution. And so, yeah, we missed out on the agricultural revolution because we were enslaved and in bondage. We missed out on the industrial revolution because of Jim Crow and coming out of it and lack of education and those things. But we also missed out, and Congressman Clyburn talks about this all the time, we missed out on the VA loans after World War II and the college, the GI Bill. My grandfather proudly served in World War II, but couldn't use his GI Bill to go to school in Louisiana. It was a segregated system. And unless he could get to the HBCU, to Southern or Grambling, miles, hours away from where he was, he never got the benefit of that middle class maker that many of our white veterans received. The VA loans for the homes, they just were denied to our people. We've been missing the technological advancements as well. And so that gap continues to grow because we've continued to miss. Because even when the country has tried to build infrastructure, rural electrification, just some of the things we've done in the past, build highways and roads, we didn't do it with any type of equity lens at all. So even some of those things that had some good benefit, if Black and brown people didn't get to build it, or you built it in the middle of our neighborhoods, destroying our Black businesses, we just widened the gap. And so when I said that we really need to understand what causes the gap and why the gap continues to grow, until we really understand it, we can't close it. Now, I think I understand some of it. What can we do to close the gap at MBDA? Well, one thing I think we can do right now is to make sure we don't miss this revolution that's occurring right now, this infrastructure revolution, this $4 trillion of revolution that the government is investing, whether it be in broadband or in chips and science, microchips, or it be in just roads and bridges. If we're not careful and we don't place an equity lens on those investments, we don't make sure that Black and brown businesses and people of color are not only getting the benefits of these things, but as I've been saying, we're planting the seeds and we'll participate in eating the fruit. If we miss this out, the gap will only continue to grow. So we close the gap at MBDA by, again, as John says, giving people capabilities, making them more capital ready, giving them more resources to run successful businesses. And then all of us together must close the gap by saying to the federal government, you got to award contracts to these businesses. And private equity, you have to step up too. You have to fund these businesses. You got to provide capital to these businesses, and you got to use them in supplier diversity, and you got to make them part of your supply chains. And so it's a whole effort of all of us. It's a whole communal effort. But we do have an opportunity. That's why entrepreneurs are so excited right now. There's opportunity, there's money, there's a need to rebuild. We got to be intentional. We have to have an equity lens. Joe Biden talks about equity all the time. Gina Raimondo talks about equity all the time. The president talks about equity as if it's his North Star. It's the North Star of the administration. Is the first executive order he issued when he was elected. If equity is the North Star of the president's agenda and the vice president's agenda, and I believe it is, MBDA must be the compass. We have to always face north, and whether it's night or day, we don't ever lose direction. That is what I think we can do to close the wealth gap. Be a voice, train as many minorities as we can, minority business owners as we can, build the networks as much as we can. We talk about minority. We need white people to help too. Right. Black folks can't fix Black folks' problem by themselves. No community in America can do it alone. We have to have our partners from all of our walks of life, all of our backgrounds to help do this. MBDA is focused on helping give people boots and straps who've not always had boots and straps. But we're not an exclusionary agency at all. We want our networks. We need our partners. We have to grow these businesses. We have an extremely diverse staff. I want people who work for me from any background who cares about these issues. And so that's how we play our small part at MBDA in closing the gap. But it's going to take a lot of people to education. You talked about education. It's going to take, look, crime is not helping our gap. Violence is not helping our gap. The economy has not always helped our gap. It's a lot of other things that we have to focus on, but we're going to play our small role at MBDA, which I think is training people and getting them ready for the opportunity that could come hopefully very soon for them.
Outstanding answer. So, Don, I've been in this game, the DE&I space, a while, as have you, and I've encountered people who will say difficult things to my face, and I've always respected them because you don't start from a place of agreement. But moreover, I'm hearing things in the marketplace. I'm hearing things in the wilderness that I haven't heard before. And we don't get political on insights, but the topic isn't political. Maybe the man is. But I'm seeing anti-DEI initiatives. I'm seeing anti-ESG initiatives. I'm seeing declarations of war on wokeness. We just taught America what being woke was. Now there's a war on it. Talk to me about what you are seeing and hearing with the headwinds that, frankly, organizations with names like minority and diversity are being quite challenged. Talk to us about what you're seeing in the marketplace around that.
Yeah, well, I'm seeing and hearing a lot of the same things you are as well. And what I've tried to do and what I've asked my team to do at MBDA is to tune it out. And at every speech that I make, Bob, every single speech I make, I talk about equity. And so whether people want to couch DE&I or wokeness, people want to couch, I talk about equity. And I talk about it to all audiences and to all crowds. And I do it unapologetically because it's the right thing to do. America has been a country that has prided itself that we will rebuild other countries during tsunamis. We will rebuild war-torn Europe after World War II. And as Whitney Young said, but we would not invest the same into our own communities. We'll give shirts off our backs to other folks, but not always show each other the same type of grace. That lack of that inequality is what the civil rights movement talked about. But I've been talking about this inequity. That is what's costing our country. That is what's keeping us behind. That is what makes our enemies excites our enemies, is that America is this attack on equity is troubling. I spoke to a group of soldiers recently. I'm still in the National Guard, and I was speaking to them, and I was trying to relate equity to them so they could understand. And I've been using this analogy because it seems to resonate with people who may not always be on the same side of the aisle with me. What makes our military in America, as we soldiers and airmen and Marines and we love to say, what makes us the greatest fighting force in the history of the world is it's our diversity. It's the fact that we really are a gumbo of people. We bring people from all different walks of life. We don't lose our flavor, but we make such a wonderful wonderful broth, right? We are a fighting force because we don't have groupthink. We can have an African-American Secretary of Defense and a white private, and it makes us who we are. But when people get to basic training, Bob Greene, everybody doesn't come from the same background. Everybody didn't make the same ASVAB score. Everybody doesn't have the same skills. Everybody's not going to do the same things. We give everybody boots, but we make sure the boots fit them. And we give every soldier and sailor and airman and Marine the ability, if they want to be successful in our armed forces, that ability. But we meet them where they are.
That's right.
And as a result, they become one unit. We don't do that in the economy, though. We don't necessarily do that in the educational system. There's so many parts of our country that we don't do that in. And as a result, those gaps, that persistent gap, the economic gaps, the wealth gap. So when I'm explaining equity to these people who want to attack the words that you mentioned, wokeness, and I just wash off my back. I talk about it from, you cannot love this country and believe in the American dream and what has made this country great and all the things we've prided ourselves on, and not believe in equity, not believing in meeting people where they are and giving them. You can't say pull yourselves up by the bootstraps and never acknowledge that some people never had boots and some people never had straps and some never had either.
That's right.
And so that is how I'm talking about it. And that is how I've talked to corporate America about it. That's how I'm talking to young men and women that I meet on the streets. And I have found that when you break it down to them, they say, you're right. They find a time, and even in their life, where they say, you're right, somebody had to help me meet where I am. I'll just wrap up with this. Despite the attacks, I still find that when I am speaking to people in the business community, when I'm speaking to people who really do care about America and the future of America, people who are smart enough to realize the demographics of the country are changing, and we just live in a different day today than we did even just 10 years ago. I think those companies and those folks are still very committed to making sure that DE&I and equity and diversity and investment is we're moving that way. We're still moving towards the positive. Is it moving fast enough is another issue. But I'm not seeing many of our companies in our private sector, our corporate citizens saying, "Oh, I'm not doing this anymore." So I don't know. You may be hearing something different, but I'm still very energized and enthused that I think people who care about this nation, who really do, still see the value of us being a diverse, inclusive, forward-moving nation.
No, I think your answer is very intuitive and spot on. Don, I want to cover a couple of more topics before we convene, before we wrap up here today. I want to talk a little bit about this problem of access to capital, right? I mean, I preach a sermon every day of the week on access to capital, and I do it with different audiences, and I'm so grateful for you and your agency and the resources that you are going to be bringing into the marketplace, because for the first time probably since the creation of the MESBIC program, there has never been more energy, capital, and focus placed on this one problem. And Reverend Jackson was quite adamant about saying you can't live in a capitalistic society and not have capital, right? It just you just can't, because you get eaten up by all the other isms, right? And that's where we are in our community. What's your message and your thinking around the access to capital piece, the nuances of it, the challenges, the fits and starts? Where are you as the convener on talking about access to capital and how it impacts minority business?
So, I had a young woman who reached out to me recently who was part of our business center family, and she said, "Look, I appreciate the fact, sir, that you all are doing the technical assistance and the business support services. And I'm happy to hear about this capital readiness program, sir, where you're going to have more training centers. But you cannot have a country." This is a young entrepreneur. This is the type of smart people, young people that are out there. We cannot have a country of overtrained, unfunded entrepreneurs. And that is another one of those issues that I think about deeply. And so, yes, we're building these technical assistance centers, but then how do we build the gap? As a convener, we've done a couple of things, Brother Bob. One, we just last year, before I got to the agency, 2 grants were awarded to 2 entities to create these innovative access to capital programs. And so I'm interested to see what these programs will yield. As I said, these were grants that were made before me, but they were made to two organizations that are supposed to come up with ideas and alternatives as it relates to asset building and CDFIs and researching cash flow. And so I think MBDA can play a role in some of the research. In a couple of weeks, and I'm hoping you're going to join us for that, we are going to have our first capital forum. And so the Minority Business Development Act, which created our agency, mandates that once a year, annually, we're supposed to have an annual capital forum. And my intention for that is to bring people like Bob Greene, our traditional bankers, our non-traditional bankers, our chambers, our MBEs, to come in and have a very frank discussion about the world of capital. So again, convener, that's one of the roles that we're going to play as well. And then the last thing I'll say is, so research, convening, and I'm willing to be the stick too. There's some programs that have been designed that aren't working, and whoever serves in this role has to be able to unapologetically be the stick when necessary. We know that there are programs of the government, they're government guaranteed programs that the SBA oversees, but the programs are still left to the private banks to actually make the loans. And so although the SBA, I think, is running the program and does fine, at the end of the day, the banks still have to agree to make those 7A loans anyway. And what we find is that African Americans and Latino Americans are not getting a proportionate share of those loans. The undersecretary of the Minority Business Development Agency is supposed to talk about that. We're supposed to talk about that, and we're supposed to raise Cain about that, and I'm going to do that too. We know that Black and brown women last year received 0.5% of VC funding. That's not even. You can't mess up and be that low. Like, I mean, you would have made a mistake. You would have done better than that. And so that's a problem I think the undersecretary of MBDA and MBDA needs to be talking about that. One way we can address that as well is we need more people of color in the VC world.
Yeah.
You know, and so those are ways that I think our team is going to be able to help in that very broad gulf. In the 1970s, MBDA actually did have a loan program. There's nothing preventing us. I think that's why I asked your members, read the act. I think MBDA has the authority to do it again. It has not been funded, but it is something that I want to look at, or at least pass to my successor, that if we know minority firms are having a disproportionate problem getting government loans, traditional loans, VC, then where do they go? Maybe it's the MBDA, right? We're very high right now on the technical assistance side. Maybe the new MBDA, the next iteration of MBDA, maybe, you know, before I'm gone, I'll be able to come and cut the ribbon on the next iteration of MBDA, where they're doing those government guaranteed loans to minority businesses. But there's a gulf there, and I'm worried that we will have a nation of overtrained, unfunded entrepreneurs. And so I'm going to convene. I'm going to bring people together, but that alone will not solve the problem. We're going to need people like you, Bob Greene, and many of those smart men and women in your organization on both sides of the aisle to help us figure out what do we do.
Well, in an environment, we've come to the end of our interview, but I want to say to you, Don, in an environment where a temporary agency helped create the NAIC, where a temporary agency helped create and fund the NMSDC, where a temporary agency helped create research that filtered into many business plans, where a temporary agency created tens, if not hundreds of thousands of trained entrepreneurs. I'm really excited about what a permanent agency can do. A permanent agency with the funding, a permanent agency with the clarity of mission, and most importantly, a current agency who obviously has now very dynamic leadership. And I want to give to you what I would hope to be high praise and tell you former Commerce Secretary Ron Brown would be enormously proud of you and the work that you're doing. And I wish you Godspeed and continued success, Undersecretary for Minority Business Development, Donald R. Cravins Jr. Thank you for joining me on Insights today.
Thank you, brother. It's been a pleasure and an honor.
Be well. I'll see you soon.
Thank you, sir.
Bye-bye.